She hesitated for what felt like forever, until finally she worked up the courage to say, if we got it out of our systems. My entire body was so tense I was in danger of shattering like fractured glass. I repeated, my voice raw, her lashes lowered. She managed to look composed despite her vulnerability. Her tone was crisp. Don't be intentionally obtuse, Jackson, you know exactly what I mean. When I continued to stare at her, trembling with disbelief, she made her meaning perfectly clear by biting her full lower lip and leaning closer. On a groan, I dropped my forehead to her chest. She was overwhelming me. I felt like I would die in this bed, lying on top of her. My heart exploded in my chest like a grenade. She turned her lips to my ear. It doesn't have to change anything. One time just so we can get past it and put it behind us. And since neither of us has gotten any in forever, I won't be able to have you once, I growled and took her mouth. The kiss was hot and desperate, partly because I figured I had nothing to lose and partly because I was so overwhelmed I was almost angry. She responded by arching up into me and digging her fingers into my shoulders, which made my already throbbing body so tense it was physically painful. I broke away and held her wrists over her head on the pillow. We were both panting. I was practically vibrating with frustration. Fuck Bianca, she wasn't done torturing me. She lifted her head, put her mouth against my throat and bit me. Gently but enough to sting. Against my skin she murmured, yes, that's exactly what you should do, Jax, let go. I groaned. What the hell was going on? Hearing those words from that normally reserved mouth made it all the more intense. I wanted nothing more than to pull her closer, but I knew it would be a disaster. Everything would be awkward afterward. Everything would change. There was no way I could have her only once. I knew I'd be addicted from the first moment and end up being obsessed, hounding her like her ex until eventually she hated me. It was the thing I was most afraid of, Bianca hating me. My inheritance be damned, I couldn't lose her. The little wildcat lifted her legs and hooked her ankles around my waist. She inhaled deeply against my neck and made a sound of pleasure. Started to rock her hips. You're killing me, I gasped. Why are you making me beg? She protested, sliding her hands under my arms so she could reach down and squeeze my shoulders, which she did with vigor. Why are you suddenly so affected? She lowered her head to the pillow and gazed up at me, her eyes half-lidded and hot. Her voice was a throaty whisper. Because you're beautiful, Jackson Boudreaux, inside and out. I'm an idiot for not realizing it sooner. My heart stalled out, then took off like a rocket. Resting my weight on my elbows, I cupped her face in my hands and stared down at her, wanting to memorize every little thing, every aspect of this moment. Her eyes and chin and nose, the way her hairline dipped to a widow's peak at the top of her forehead. Her sexy red cupid's bow mouth. I said raggedly, I can't, not only once. I can't risk it being weird after. I couldn't live with myself if I messed this up. She drew in a slow breath, let it out through her nose. Then she cocked her head and considered me. So it's a negotiation then? My brows shot up. Excuse me. Well, if you can't do it only once, how many times do you think you would be able to do it? She blinked lazily. One corner of her mouth lifted in a tiny rogue grin that she quickly suppressed. Speech was becoming difficult. I'm so out of practice. I think the first 10 or 20 times might just be getting me back up to speed. 10 or 20? Ambitious, aren't you? She unhooked her ankles from around my waist and slid her foot down my leg, her toes curled around my calf. And would that all be in one day, or no, I said forcefully. I took my tone down a notch and tried to look serious. My blood pressure was through the roof. No, I think I'd need a lot more time than that. I cleared my throat of the rasp. I mean, I don't want to wear you out or anything. Such a gentleman, she whispered. Looking into my eyes, she slowly pressed against me. I felt her right through my shirt, 2 firm points that needed my attention. A growl built low in my belly and worked its way through my chest and out my mouth, but still I held back. Suddenly all the teasing left her voice and her eyes. She said firmly, Jackson, I'm in your bed, I'm wearing your ring, we're drawn to each other. Be with me, damn it, and hurry up about it. A heartbeat of silence pounded between us. The moment stretched thin, then snapped, and the final shreds of my control curled up like burning paper and turned to ash. I said, you should write poetry, and crushed my mouth to hers. 32 Bianca I'd seen Jackson's scary side. I'd seen his hidden sweet side too, and his suave side and a dozen others, but I'd never seen him so intense. Off, he snarled, impatiently pulling my t-shirt over my head. He tossed it aside and it sailed across the room. He took a moment to stare down at me, his eyes black with desire, then he grabbed my sleep shorts and yanked them down my hips. Away they went, flung over to the dresser along with my panties. Kneeling between my spread legs, he made an animal noise as his gaze raked over me, then his mouth was on my flesh. There, I cried out in shock. His mouth was so hot and wet, so unexpected. He dug his fingers into my hips and I almost died from pleasure. So fucking sweet, I knew you'd taste sweet. He took a moment to growl, his breath fanning over my spread thighs. Then he went right back to business. I threaded my shaking fingers into the thick, soft mess of his hair because I needed to feel it. I didn't realize how much I'd wanted to touch it until now, and now that I could, I took big, greedy handfuls of it and breathlessly laughed. I sounded like I'd just robbed a bank and gotten away with it. Jackson ignored my crazy laugh. His tongue, oh clever tongue, circled round and round that small, rigid nub between my legs until it throbbed and I was gasping for air. When I arched off the bed and cried out, Jackson turned his head and gently bit my thigh. "Close already?" he asked, laughter in his tone. My hips rocking, I begged him not to stop in a garbled mess of words. "You're so goddamn beautiful," he whispered. "I wish you could see yourself." He ran his palms up and down my thighs, testing the flesh, pinching it and stroking it, his big hands rough and warm. "This beautiful skin." He kissed my leg. "These perfect breasts." He reached up and squeezed them, thumbing over my hard nipples so I shivered in delight. His voice turned spine-chillingly dark. "And this gorgeous, look at you spread open for me, all pink and soft. Christ. I can't decide if I want to taste you until you come and then be with you, or if I should make you come on my hard body first. Sweet baby Jesus in the manger, Jackson Boudreaux is a dirty talker. Please," I pleaded brokenly. "Jax." He gently pinched me between two fingers and blew on it. I moaned like a porn star. "Tell me what you want," he demanded, lazily stroking me. I blurted, "Anything, everything, you." "Oh, sweetheart," he murmured, "you already have me." Then he gifted me with his tongue again. I sighed in relief, my breath shuddering out of me, my body writhing under the expert movements of his hands and mouth. He knew exactly how to take me to the edge and keep me there, teasing and gentling when I got too close, chuckling at my delirious implorings of more. "Hurry, I'll kill you if you stop." He took his time, though I knew he felt the same unbearable urgency I did. His fingers digging into my skin were just shy of painful. Every once in a while he would catch his breath and curse. I felt like I was riding a wave of heat and emotion, expanding from my body to fill the room, the house, the entire state. I wanted to laugh and cry and scream. I wanted to break apart and let him put me back together. I was sinking into the bed at the same time as I was floating over it, the feel of his stubble exquisitely rough on my inner thighs, the sound of his deep-chested grunts reverberating all the way through me. "Oh God, Jax," I groaned, unable to hold it in. "I'm there, oh God, I'm there, I'm so." My orgasm stole the words right out of my mouth. I bucked and gasped, my body bowed. My fingers dug into his hair and I exploded. He hooked his forearm over my belly and held me down as I convulsed. He slid 2 fingers of his other hand inside me. Clenching hard around them, I screamed. It lasted forever, or seemed to. Pulsing and heat and flashing lights behind my closed eyelids, the feel of his fingernails breaking my skin. Everything so crystalline clear, so achingly raw, I felt exposed on every level, all my nerves on fire and the frantic hummingbird beat of my heart pounding like gunfire in my ears. When I came back to myself, I was crying. "Hush, sweetheart," Jackson crooned, climbing over me. He settled his weight between my legs and nuzzled my neck. I clung to him, overcome, shaking with the aftermath of acute pleasure and a sudden bottomless fear. Whatever that was, it was something I'd never felt before, and it scared the bejesus out of me. "It's okay," he whispered, peppering soft kisses all over my cheeks. His heart pounded against my chest as hard and erratically as mine did. He was so warm and big and comfortable, an enormous man pillow I could burrow into and get lost. I loved his weight. I loved how he smelled. I loved how tender he was being, this giant of a human who could crush me in one fist but was stroking my face with the care of someone handling fine china. I loved how he made me feel so safe. I did not love the strange terror that evoked. When I finally managed to pull myself together, I sniffled in embarrassment and turned my face to the pillow. "Sorry, I'm not normally a weeper after, but that was..." I shivered and tightened my arms around his neck. He whispered into my ear, "Don't apologize, I feel like a god right now." I cracked open an eye. He was staring down at me, a big, goofy grin on his face. His dark hair was mussed, his blue eyes were alight, and he was so handsome it took my breath away. Dazed, I said, "You are a god, Jax. You're the Michael Jordan of, you're the Warren Buffett of, you're the Steve Jobs of." "Okay," he interrupted dryly. "No more other men's names out of your mouth while you're in my bed." I smiled at him. "I'm sorry." "That was just like," I sighed dreamily. "Wow." The light in his eyes grew hotter. He whispered, "And that was only Act 1. Fingers crossed there were a dozen more to follow. Jackson rose to his knees. Staring down at me, he slowly unbuttoned his shirt. It parted under his fingers, revealing his gorgeous hard chest, those abs of steel, that fine dark happy trail I found so enticing. He shrugged the shirt off his shoulders and I sighed again, wiggling my toes in happiness. "Goddamn woman," he said, his voice husky. "You're gonna turn me into an egomaniac. You should see those eyes, filthy." I giggled. "You're very pretty, Jackson. This especially is my favorite." I propped myself up on one elbow and trailed my finger down the soft line of hair on his stomach. His abs quivered under my touch. I glanced up to find him gazing down at me in molten stillness, watching me with predatory eyes. I had an idea. I sat up, flattened my hands over his abdomen and smiled up at him. I pressed a soft kiss to the square inch of warm skin right below his belly button. He froze. "What are you doing? Wouldn't you like to know?" I teased. Maintaining eye contact, I traced a circle around his belly button with my tongue, then dipped it in. His sucked-in breath made me grin. I was getting an inkling of how my unraveling made him feel, and I wanted more of it. I wanted him undone. My fingers found the fly of his jeans. The buttons slid open with the silkiness of melted butter. I pressed a kiss to the small strip of newly exposed skin above his briefs, and Jackson stopped breathing. When I licked it, he softly moaned. "Your little tongue," he whispered, staring at me in fascination. "Your little pink." His words were swallowed by another moan when I curled my hand around the enormous bulge, straining the front of his briefs, and gently squeezed. Straight-faced, I said, "There seems to be something requiring attention in your underwear, Mr. Boudreau. Judging by the size, it could be a medical emergency. Shall I have a look?" He looked like he was going to pass out. He said faintly, "Yes, nurse, please do." It took a geologic epoch for me to pull down his briefs because I was enjoying his expression too much to go any faster. When I finally tore my gaze away from his and looked down, I gasped. "Holy guacamole," I breathed, floored by the sheer size of Jackson's erection. "Mr. Boudreau, this is life-threatening." In a strangled voice he said, "Perhaps you should administer oral treatment." I nodded. "I concur, excellent diagnosis." Then I applied my mouth and thrilled to the sound of Jackson's hoarse gasp. He was too big to fit more than a few inches into my mouth, but I made up for it with both my hands, which I wrapped around his shaft and stroked in tandem with my tongue. His shaking hands cupped my head. His breathing was labored. After I'd established a rhythm, Jackson matched it with gentle thrusts of his pelvis, each one working a soft groan from his chest. He was ridiculously large, but I loved the way he tasted and smelled, all that masculine warmth and musk, delicious. I opened my throat, testing my endurance, and was rewarded with Jackson barking, "Fuck." His fingers twitched against my scalp, so of course I had to do it again. And again. And again. He sucked in a breath like a hiss between his teeth. He warned, "Bianca." I looked up at him. His eyes were barely open, his face was flushed, his chest was heaving. I felt like a superhero. I said, "I can't decide if I want to pleasure you until you come and then foo in one swift move." Jackson had me on my back with my legs spread around my waist and my wrists pinned against the pillow. He kissed me hard, holding nothing back. I rocked my hips against the straining heat of his erection and he bit my lower lip. "Are you trying to drive me crazy?" he hissed, eyes blazing. "Yes," I said. "I want the beast unleashed. I want both of us unleashed. I want it to be wild." His eyes closed briefly. He muttered to himself, "Thank God," then kissed me again so hard it left me breathless and bruised. A small table sat beside the bed. He reached over me, grabbed his wallet, pulled something out. A rip of foil and I knew we were covered. "Good thinking, Mr. Boudreau." I gasped as his heat and harness slid into me. Then I couldn't talk anymore because he flexed his hips and drove himself deep inside. My hips rose to meet his, my neck arched, my eyes slid shut. I heard his rough whisper against my ear like it was coming from somewhere very far away. "Bianca, my Bianca, I knew we'd fit just right." Then he dropped his mouth to my neck and started to move. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't controlled, but it was everything I wanted and needed. I praised him with such loud, wanton moans I probably scared Droopy Dog half to death as he heard the echoes down the halls. Jackson still had on his jeans, which somehow made everything even hotter. The waistband was bunched around his ass. I shoved it down farther so I could grip those gloriously firm globes as he pumped hard into me, grunting and swearing. So good, so amazing, oh God, don't stop, I babbled, writhing beneath him. He panted. I can't, we have to slow down, I hollered, if you stop you die. He groaned like he was in agony. I gripped his face and kissed him so hard I tasted blood. I wrapped my legs around his back and held on as he started to buck wildly, thrashing the bed. We were both sweating, panting, moaning and kissing sloppily, out of our minds and loving it. He reared up on his hands, threw his head back and roared my name at the ceiling. So this is what all those stupid love songs are about, I thought, just before I went supernova and exploded in a white-hot ball of fire into space. 33 Jackson, we lay stunned and speechless, tangled in each other's arms on the demolished bed like victims of a bombing. After a while, Bianca said in a tremulous voice, "Oh my, that was perfect." I stared at her in awe. Incredible, mind-blowing. "We should get a trophy." Blinking slowly, she smiled. It was a heartbreaking smile, a thing of such soul-lifting and astonishing beauty I felt like a man who'd just discovered religion. She was my religion. My north and south, my heaven and earth, the axis of rightness around which everything had suddenly aligned. For the first time in my life, all my polarized parts worked as one, humming happily along in harmony with the universe, finally understanding their place. I surrendered to the feeling completely and without hesitation, knowing that most people would never experience this. This blinding joy, this transcendent bliss, this seismic shift of focus from themselves to someone else that strangely and simultaneously gave birth to the freedom and bone-deep peace they'd been seeking all along. I always thought love was a pair of shackles, but I was wrong. Love was the open door of a cage. "You certainly have a lot of energy, Mr. Boudreau," my love said, prim as a librarian. It made me laugh so heartily it shook the bed. I threw my leg over her, pulled her to me and sighed in happiness. She burrowed against me, making soft, growly sounds of pleasure, her little hands pawing my chest. "Sex fiend," I whispered indulgently as she ran her hands all over my body. "I can't help it," she protested. "You're built like a skyscraper and your skin is like a unicorn's mane." I frowned. A unicorn's mane. All silky and shiny and mystical. She said it like, duh, what moron doesn't know what a unicorn's mane is like? I laughed again, helplessly charmed. "You're awfully jolly after," she said, "me likey." Oh God, my fucking heart was going to split open like an overripe piece of fruit. "And you're awfully chatty." I captured her lips and kissed her to shut her up. When we finally came up for air, she stretched against me like a cat, supple and satisfied, lazily licking her lips. "You're a dish," she declared. "If you were food, you'd be the fillet from that cow on your father's plane that was massaged and coddled into beefy, delicious perfection." "That's disturbing," I said, kissing the tip of her nose. "But thank you, I think." Her mood shifted like quicksilver from gossamer light to guarded. She pursed her lips and contemplated my sternum. "Speaking of your father." "What?" I was instantly on high alert. She glanced up at me. "You need to talk to him." There was something behind her eyes that worried me. "Why?" She dropped her gaze to my chest and started toying with my chest hair. Well, I had a little chat with him last night after you passed out." Her pause was infinitesimal. "With your mother, too." My blood pressure went from sleeping baby to day trader on the stock market on Black Monday. "About?" Her eyes flashed up to mine. "Don't shout." "I'm not shouting, I'm asking." She glared at me. I blew out a deliberate breath and lowered my voice. "I'm sorry. Talking about my parents when I'm naked in bed with you is... yuck." She pouted for a second, then relented. "How much do you remember from last night?" I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it. How much did I remember? Backtracking to before the amazing dream that turned out not to be a dream this morning, I recalled arriving at Moonstar yesterday evening, meeting my father in the foyer, coming up to my room to change, going back down to dinner to suffer through the screaming silence of all the family dinners I'd enjoyed growing up, and then... nothing. "I drank too much," I pronounced. I slanted my eyes down at Bianca, hoping she'd fill in the blanks. She knew I was bluffing but took pity on me. "You told me about Link and cricket," she said gently. "And about what happened after, going to New Orleans, Christian Cody, everything." Coldness sliced through me, freezing as an Arctic wind. Then, worse, suspicion. Did she sleep with me because she felt sorry for me? Examining my face, Bianca pounded her little fists on my chest. "If you ever look at me like that again," she said, seething, "you won't be a nice, tasty fillet anymore, Jackson Boudreau, you'll be ground beef." Her threat made me feel oddly relieved. I love it when you threaten me with bodily harm, I said and kissed her again. She sighed contentedly against my lips. I was enamored by how quickly she could get over anger. It usually took me days. She said, well, someone's got to keep you in line, might as well be your wife. It was a throwaway line, but it speared me right through the heart. It took a moment for my blood to start circulating again. Wife, I repeated solemnly, gazing into her eyes. She wrinkled her nose. Lord, you make it sound like someone just told you Christmas was cancelled. I cupped her jaw in my hand. No, it's like someone just told me I won the lottery. Do billionaires play the lottery? They would if they knew you were the prize. She squirmed a little, pleased but acting like she wasn't, and resumed toying with my chest hair like it was her new pet. I stroked her face, dazzled by all the little dancing hearts in my eyes. I need a shower, she pronounced, then looked at me from under her lashes. God, those filthy eyes, you could probably be arrested for that look. Pervert, she said casually. Well, since we're doing a weekend before we go back to real life, I might as well make the most of it, right? Inside my head was the sound a freight train makes when it slams on its brakes, then topples off the tracks, spilling its load of munitions and poison gas, which promptly explode in an enormous orange ball of flame, scorching the earth and destroying all life in a 50-mile radius. Clearly for Bianca, this wasn't the start of something deeper between us. This was the itch that needed to be scratched before it could be forgotten. This was the annoying, tickling pressure that had built to the point where it could only be relieved with a reflexive action like a sneeze. Bianca was going to sneeze me out of her system. She told me flat out, it would be a good idea if we got it out of our systems. And I'd gone and fallen in love with her. What a fool. Right, I said, shuttering my eyes. She examined my expression for a moment. What's that face you're making? I don't recognize that face. This is what heartbreak looks like. Nothing, I said flatly. I'm fine. She pushed me in the chest so hard I flopped onto my back. My eyes flew open in surprise. I grunted as she threw herself on top of me. No, she shouted. No, you don't get to do that after you were just inside me not even 5 minutes ago. You do not get to be all weird and withdrawn and non-communicative, do you hear me? Talk. She jabbed me in the chest with her finger. Glaring down at me with her dark hair wild all around her face and her eyes blazing black fury, she was a little bit terrifying, but I was madly in love with her, so I had to tell her the truth. I told you once wouldn't be enough, I said gruffly. It sounded like an accusation. So, and it was a challenge which pissed me off. So, I snapped, you seduced me. Her eyes flared in outrage, but I was only getting started. And now you're telling me this weekend is all I'm getting. And I already told you I didn't want to mess this up. So now it's too late because it is messed up because I won't be able to have you just once, and I'm going to go insane trying to keep my hands off you now, because to you this was only. But to me it was a lot more, and you told me I was beautiful. I roared it into her face with so much force her hair fluttered back from her cheeks. I stared at her, panting, enraged, all the tendons standing out in my neck. Then her eyes softened and she smiled. Oh, Jax, she said tenderly, we're going to have to do something about that temper. She took my face in her hands and kissed me. I was completely confused. Kiss me back, she demanded when I remained frozen beneath her. I sputtered. Are you having some sort of psychotic break I should be aware of? She sighed and tucked her face into the space between my neck and shoulder, snuggling closer to my body. You conveniently forgot about the 10 or 20 times part of our conversation, beastie. When I remained stiff and unresponsive, she sighed again. And the part where I asked if that would all be in one day and you said you'd need a lot more time than that. When I still didn't say anything, she tapped me impatiently on my sternum. I turned my head and looked at her. She was smiling up at me indulgently, like I was a giant, fussing baby. I'll be very clear since you seem to be having trouble processing what I'm trying to say. She cleared her throat, becoming businesslike. Mr. Boudreaux. When I said we were having a weekend, I didn't mean we were only having a weekend. All the breath left my body in an audible rush. I put my hand over my eyes to hide my relief. More gently she said, I'm not putting any rules on this. When I said, didn't have to change anything, that was the truth. I hope it doesn't make things awkward when we get home if one of us decides it's better to remain friends, seeing as how this is a business deal and all. I couldn't help myself, I growled. I know, she whispered. It's an odd situation for us both, obviously, but if it even has a chance to work out, we have to promise to be completely honest with each other. There was a long pause, and I was being honest when I said I thought you were beautiful, so there's that. After I corralled my stampeding emotions, I griped, "You're not so bad yourself." She burst out laughing. Such flowery, romantic words, oh, I'm overcome. I rolled her onto her back, pinned her down, and kissed her all over her face as she laughed, and my heart expanded like a balloon. The problem with balloons is that at some point they have to either deflate or burst. After I brushed my teeth and changed into clean clothes, I left Bianca dozing in my bed and went downstairs to find my parents. They were eating breakfast in the solar off the kitchen, a large, sunny room with a glass ceiling to let in the light, the noisy chatter of my mother's caged songbirds colouring in the air. I stood outside the doorway for a moment, watching them, a band of steel tightening around my chest. What had Bianca told them, and would it change anything? My father looked up and saw me standing there before my mother did, his face transformed. "Jackson," he said, smiling. "Good morning." My mother looked up, slowly set her fork down onto her plate and blinked, gazing at me like she'd never seen me before. All in all, it was unsettling. I walked stiffly to the table. My father stood. I cleared my throat, awkward words of greeting on my tongue, but he cancelled that plan when he opened his arms and grabbed me in a bear hug, squeezing tighter than a man in his 70s should be capable of. "Son," he said, his voice choked. "Oh, son." He gave me a good, hard shake. "It's so good to have you home." Wide-eyed, I looked over his shoulder at my mother. She was dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. My father released me and clapped me so hard on the back I almost pitched forward. I caught myself in time and took refuge in a chair where I sat looking between the two of them with trepidation. My mother reached over and grasped my hand. A miracle. A servant deposited a glass of orange juice on the table in front of me. "Breakfast, sir." I waved my hand and the servant melted away. I couldn't deal with food right now, but the orange juice was too great a temptation, so I chugged it. "We owe you an apology," said my father, instantly prompting me to choke. He had to pound me on the back several times before I was able to catch my breath, and even then I wasn't able to speak, only stare at him in watery-eyed, gasping disbelief. "Oh, now don't gimme that face," he said, snapping his napkin over his lap. "You're not innocent in all of this either. You never even told us we had a grandson." The sound that came out of me wasn't technically a word, but my father snorted like I'd disagreed with him. "Yes, Bianca told me you adopted Christian's son, and I'm damned pissed off that you'd keep that from us. You know how much your mother wants grandbabies. And you could have told me what really happened with Cricket, it would have saved us years of grief." He looked at me, stricken. "Not that it was anything like what you probably went through, of course. I didn't mean that. Only, well, shit, Jackson, you never gave your mother and me a chance to be there for you. You just disappeared, and when Rayford found you he wouldn't tell us anything either, and we never saw either one of you again. It was like the two of you went into the witness protection program. It took a long time for me to recover from that. But," I looked at my mother, "I gave you a stroke." She sighed like she was disappointed she'd given birth to such an idiot. Exasperated, my father trumpeted, "You can't take credit for that, boy. Your mother's been on a blood thinner for 20 years because she'd had a minor stroke before you were born and the doctors were trying to prevent another one. Sticky blood runs in her side of the family. Jesus H. Christ on a crutch, what nonsense. And this is why you stayed away." My temper snapped. I stood, shoving back my chair. "I stayed away because you loved Link more than you ever loved me." My mother gasped. My father gaped at me. The servant silently excused himself from the room and disappeared. "Jackson Walker Boudreaux," said my mother in a halting, horrified whisper. She was white as a sheet, her eyes filled with tears. "That is a terrible thing to say and untrue," my father said crossly. "Well, now you've done it. Congratulations, boy, you've made your mother cry." He went to her, took her hand and held it, crooned soothing words to her as she wept, and I looked on, convinced I was in a state of shock so severe I'd had a mental break with reality. Finally, when he'd calmed her down, he pulled himself to his full height, straightened his shoulders, and let me have it. "Now you listen to me real good, son, because I'm only gonna say this once. We love you. We love you now, we loved you then, we'll love you until we die. You're our son. We know we weren't perfect parents, but you were a handful. Maybe we didn't always know the right way to deal with you, but we never loved you less than your brother. Never, and we never blamed you for his death either, even though I know you think we did." When I blinked in shock, he nodded. "That's right, I'm not stupid. You got my blood in your veins, you think I don't know what you're thinking. But you're a stubborn sob just like me. Once you get your mind set, that's it." My mother made a placating noise and he heaved a great sigh. "But it was my fault for leaving it alone for so long. I shoulda done something, I don't know, made you talk to me, but gettin' you to talk is like pullin' teeth. He waved a hand in the air like he wanted to dismiss that last part. Anyway, the bottom line is that the past is past. We're gonna have a new daughter-in-law. It's time we started actin' like a family again. By the way, we love Bianca, what a firecracker. Hopefully we'll have another grandbaby or two by this time next year. I stared at him. I stared at my mother. I opened my mouth and found I had no words. Well, look at that, Clemmy, said my father. Ha, I've left him speechless, score one for the old man. I sank into the chair and put my head into my hands. The servant reappeared, set a bloody Dixie on the table in front of me and murmured, I hope you still like these, sir, thought you might need it. Welcome home. When he disappeared again, it was to the sound of my soft, disbelieving laughter. Bloody Dixie makes 4 servings 1 32-ounce bottle of tomato juice 2 ounces, vodka 1 tablespoon freshly grated horseradish. Or prepared. 1 tablespoon lemon juice 1 tablespoon hot sauce 1 tablespoon Worcestershire sauce dash of celery salt dash of pepper 4 slices. Cooked bacon 4 ribs celery preparation pour out a 1/4 cup tomato juice from bottle. 2 mix horseradish, lemon juice, hot sauce, Worcestershire, celery salt and pepper into the remaining tomato juice in bottle and shake vigorously. 3 add ice to 4 highball glasses. 4 pour 2 ounces vodka over ice in each glass or to your taste. 5 add tomato juice mix to fill. 6 stir then garnish with bacon and celery. 34 Bianca I was singing loudly and badly in the shower when the glass door opened and Jackson stepped in. Don't stop, he said amused. I still have 10% of my hearing left. He was naked, calm, acting like we showered together every day of the week. He stepped in front of me, blocking the spray, and took the bar of soap from my limp hands as I ogled him. Jackson naked was one thing. Jackson naked and wet was something else altogether. Water worshipped his muscles, making all those gorgeous golden bulges gleam and sparkle like he'd been photoshopped by a mad, horny housewife. He tipped his head back to wet his hair, and it was in Technicolor slow-mo, a sexy soundtrack playing in the background. I watched with my mouth hanging open as he slowly began to soap his chest. Even Trace hadn't reached this level of physical perfection. I was showering with a Greek god, with art. How had I been so blind? Around the estrogen surge wreaking havoc in my nervous system, I said, I'll have you know I won a talent contest once with my excellent rendition of You Are My Sunshine. Jackson shook his head, spraying water droplets from his dark hair and smiled down at me. He turned me around and started soaping my shoulders and back, gently digging his thumbs into the muscles. I groaned in pleasure. He said, Really, how old were you? 7, 8, I pouted. Jerk, he chuckled, you don't think I'm a jerk. He bent down to kiss my ear. It brought his warm, wet skin in velvety contact with mine. He whispered, In fact, I think you like me. He slid an arm around my waist, pinning me against the wall of his hard body. I trashed my previous position that heaven was a library with every book ever written. No, heaven was showering with a big, naked, soapy man who had a husky voice and a gentle sense of humor and an erection that should have its own zip code. I relaxed into his embrace with a happy sigh. Maybe, I said, almost purring as he massaged my neck. The jury's still out. His big hand slid from my neck to my shoulder, then down my arm. He curved his fingers around my rib cage, reverently tracing each rib like it was a love story in Braille, then palmed my breast. He murmured, You said you wouldn't lie to me, sweetheart, and tweaked my hard nipple with his thumb. When I gasped and jumped like I'd had a mild electric shock, he chuckled again. Any other lies you want to tell? I felt nothing when you did that. Oh, that's a good one, he whispered, thumbing back and forth over my nipple as I shivered in delight. You must be shivering because it's so cold in here. Hot steam billowed all around us. I couldn't help myself and laughed. Definitely. He gently bit my neck, which I was quickly realizing was one of my favorite things in the world. He was never rough, no matter where he pressed his teeth. It was like he was testing the firmness of my flesh, like he found me so delicious he wanted to eat me. Savor me bite by bite, hold my flavor on his tongue and enjoy it like one would with bourbon or a fine wine. My head resting on his shoulder, I reached up and wound my arms around his neck. That gave him access to all the girly real estate on my body, which he immediately claimed. His lips still on my neck, he ran his hands down my sides, armpits to hips, his grip firm and possessive. His erection dug into my bottom. He flattened his hands over my stomach. I love this belly, he said faintly. He dragged his hands up to my breasts. And these, so pretty, so perfect, look how perfectly they fit in my hands. He cupped them to prove his point. It was incredibly erotic looking down at myself, his wet, soapy hands full of me. The way he touched me made me feel proud of my body, intensely feminine and powerful, though he could overpower me in a heartbeat if he wanted to. His hands slid lower, past my waist to the triangle between my legs. And this, he breathed into my ear, slipping his soapy fingers into my folds as I gasped. I love this. I want this in my mouth or my hands or on my body every day for the rest of my life. What was he saying? I was so dizzy I hardly knew. My head lolled to one side. He took my mouth in a kiss so intense it would have made me lose my footing if he hadn't held me up. It was slow, hot, and deep. His fingers swirled in small, lazy circles between my legs. I trembled and shook, making desperate sounds in my throat. I love your sweet little noises too, said Jackson, a hitch in his voice. Bianca, you're so sweet. I didn't feel sweet. I felt ravenous, a ferocious little animal who wanted to tear him to shreds with my sharp, tiny teeth. I was so hungry for him, my stomach ached. He turned us to the wall. I flattened my hands over the wet tiles. He spread his hands around my waist, measuring the span. Then he surprised me by kneeling behind me and biting my ass. God, he groaned, stroking my bottom, nipping it, grabbing big handfuls of it like he couldn't get enough. He put his hand between my legs and cupped me, slowly rubbing me as I ground myself against his palm and moaned. My eyes slid shut with pleasure. I leaned my forearms against the wall and dropped my head, canting my behind out because I loved what he was doing so much. You're the sexiest fucking woman I've ever seen in my life. His voice had a harder edge now, a desperate edge like he was unraveling. Then he stood and tilted my head back with his fingers clenched in my hair and kissed me. I reached behind me and grasped his erection. He moaned into my mouth. Like this, I said, panting, stroking his length. I went up on my toes, guiding him where I wanted him, to that aching place between my legs. Hurry. When he slid inside, he dropped his head and bit me on the long muscle between my shoulder and neck. He shuddered. His low groan went all the way through me. We stayed like that, unmoving, breathing raggedly until I couldn't stand it anymore. I flexed my hips. He jerked, driving deep into me, and I yelped in surprise. Sorry, he rasped, my laugh echoed off the walls. You're forgiven, do it again. Gripping my hips, he started a slow rhythm. I clung to the wall. He slid his hand along the back of my thigh and lifted my leg, setting my foot on the tile seat to my right. It changed the angle of everything, deepening it, forcing a low moan from my chest. He reached around and slid his fingers between my legs. I moaned again, louder. She likes that, he said, softly laughing, reaching up with his other hand to caress my breasts. No, I didn't like it, I loved it. I was obsessed by it. I never knew dirty, wet shower would turn out to be something I adored more than chocolate croissants fresh out of the oven, dripping in butter. I don't want this to stop, I gasped, headed toward that bright white peak too fast. Jax, don't ever stop. It won't stop, he said roughly into my ear. I promise, now quit holding back. How did he know? I was beginning to think the man could read my mind. I leaned against him, reached around his neck with one hand and pulled his head down. We kissed. He tested my lower lip with his teeth, explored my mouth with his tongue, took his time enjoying me. Time spun out and slowed until all the clocks stopped ticking and it was just the two of us, the water our soft, shared moans and ragged breaths. When I opened my eyes, he was staring down at me, a drop of water clinging to the tip of his nose, a look of adoration on his face. Something in the center of my chest unlocked and broke free. My orgasm slammed into me like a comet into earth. I stiffened and cried out, safe in the circle of his arms, gazing into his eyes as it happened. The bathroom echoed with the sounds of my undoing. You've ruined me for anyone else, he whispered hoarsely, beginning to lose himself. Bianca, I'm ruined. I convulsed around him, too overcome with emotion to speak. He braced his arm against the wall to hold us up. He trembled, spasmed, made a sound like he was deeply in pain. Fuck, he groaned and withdrew from my body. Then he kissed me like his life depended on it as he spilled himself onto my skin. By the time we came back to our senses, the water had started to turn cold. Jax reached out and turned off the spray. He wrapped his arms around me and hid his face in my neck, hugging me hard, his chest heaving. He said my name, but I shushed him. Not yet, let's not talk about it yet, I whispered. I was afraid what might come out of my mouth if he asked me how I was feeling. We dried off and dressed in silence, avoiding each other's eyes. We knew words would be too much, yet not enough. Something had changed between us in the shower. Something profound had taken root. "You need food," Jackson said, looking pointedly at my abdomen after another alarmingly loud rumble. My stomach sounded like it was occupied by a large, carnivorous beast, roaming around and kicking over furniture. "Food, yes," I said with the volume of a person shouting across a highway to her friend stranded on the other side. Jackson looked at me askance. He stood in the bathroom doorway, watching me wind my damp hair into a big, messy bun. I'd pulled on a white cashmere sweater he'd bought for me and a pair of lovely charcoal grey slacks he must have had custom-made because they fit perfectly in both the waist and hips, a statistical impossibility. "And maybe a stiff drink," he added dryly, examining my expression. "Stiff? Lord, don't talk to me about stiff." I met his gaze in the mirror and forced myself to sound like a sane person. "So did you talk to your parents?" One side of his mouth quirked. "I did." He let it hang there, torturing me. And a smile bloomed over his face. It was like watching the sun rise over mountains. "And they love you," he murmured, holding my gaze. Love, green beans, there was that word again. It had been popping up in my head and on his lips for the past hour like weeds through cracks in the sidewalk. I had to remind myself that this was a business deal. He was here for his inheritance, I was here for my mama. It wouldn't do to get ahead of myself and start attaching deeper meaning to things on account of hot shower. Hot, emotional, vulnerable, soul-searing, life-changing shower. "Oh," said Jackson. "I smell smoke, you're thinking again. Ha, can we please go get some food before I eat that bar of soap?" He pushed away from the doorway and wrapped his arms around me, resting his chin on top of my head. "Yep. But you have to promise if this little breakdown you're having gets any worse, you'll talk to me so I won't have to hold you down and tickle it out of you." I gave him scary crazy lady eyes. "You will not tickle me, ever, understood?" He tilted his head and whispered in my ear, "Sorry, sweetheart, that's not in the contract." Then he dug his fingers into my ribs. I screamed and tried to twist away, but he was too strong. He wrapped his arms around me and lifted me clear off my feet so we were nose to nose, my arms pinned to my side, my feet kicking uselessly around his shins. "It isn't fair that you're so giant," I groused, "and freakishly strong." "I'm not that strong, but thank you. Honey, you're holding up my entire weight like I'm a loaf of bread, one of the airy kinds like sourdough." He chuckled and kissed the tip of my nose. "Honey," he drawled. He lowered his lashes, smug as all get out. I wondered with irritation why those kind of thick, silky, black eyelashes were always wasted on boys who didn't appreciate how lucky they were to have them. I sniffed like a snooty aristocrat. It was a slip of the tongue. I'm getting lightheaded from lack of food. I could faint at any moment. He pressed a soft kiss to my lips and chuckled again. "I see, you're still in fibbing mode. All right, I'll let it go," until he checked his watch, which meant he was now holding me up with one arm. "Noon. Deal." I muttered, "Show off." He laughed and set me on my feet. "After breakfast," he said, leading me by my hand from the room, "you have your choice of horseback riding, bowling, tennis, fishing, boating, or touring the botanical gardens or Rick House." "Rick House," he looked over his shoulder at me and grinned. "It's where we house all the Ricks, obviously." I rolled my eyes. Obviously. The rest of the day was a fairy tale, and I was Cinderella. We ate breakfast in a sun-filled room Jackson called the Solar, serenaded by songbirds flitting in dozens of large cages hung at various heights around the room. The hovering servants seemed friendlier today, even daring to smile pleasantly at us when they brought our food and cleared out plates. Even more surprising, Jackson smiled back. He seemed like a different man than he was yesterday. Lighter, less burdened by ghosts. His parents seemed different too, though they didn't hover. They greeted us warmly when we came down to eat, made light conversation, and then took their leave with a promise to see us for dinner. I got the feeling they were leaving us alone together and not avoiding us, which are two very different things. Jackson gave me a tour of the estate on a golf cart emblazoned with a giant bee on the front, rear, and roof, which I found hilarious. As if anyone could mistake who it belonged to. The botanical gardens were a marvel of engineering, designed by an anal retentive botanist with a fetish for nude statuary and hedge mazes. Had I been there alone, I would have been hopelessly lost in 5 minutes. We drove by the stables at top speed. Jackson pointed them out with a jerk of his thumb. I was glad I hadn't taken him up on his offer to go riding, because there were obviously still a few of his ghosts lurking in the tack room, waiting to shriek and rattle their chains. Lakes. Trees. A beautiful white church topped by a steeple. Acres upon acres of wooded pathways and hidden putting greens and spectacular sweeping vistas darted with wildlife. More than once we had to swerve to avoid a startled jackrabbit or white-tailed deer. Moonstar Ranch was a place steeped in magic, and my feeling of being immersed in a fairy tale grew as the day wore on. All the while my engagement ring flashed and winked on my finger, sending prisms of light in starburst patterns everywhere like a promise of good things to come. We talked, laughed, held hands shyly, smiled at each other with our eyes. In the rick house, a massive concrete rectangle where the family stored their private reserve, Jackson kissed me in a cool, shadowed corner behind a soaring wall of bourbon barrels stacked 20 high on metal racks. We ate a picnic lunch under the shade of an enormous willow tree on a hill overlooking a sparkling lake. We made plans to have dinner with his parents. I wanted to make them Mama's famous jambalaya with a blackberry and bourbon cobbler for dessert. When we went back to Jackson's room to change for dinner, my cell phone was ringing. I'd left it on the dresser, too distracted from what had happened between us in the shower to remember to bring it along. Hello. I swatted away Jackson's attempt to pinch my ass with a laugh. Bianca, said Eni, her voice caught on a sob. The words fell down on me like bricks thrown from the top of a building. So sorry, she's gone, there was nothing we could do. I tried to inhale but couldn't, I tried to speak but a gasp of anguish was all I could muster. My body went hot then freezing cold. I began to violently shake. Bianca, Jackson's voice rang sharp with concern as he looked at my face. What is it? I dropped the phone and sank to my knees on the floor. Mama, I rasped, choking on the word. She's dead. From that moment on, so was I, the fairy tale was over. 35 Jackson, I've suffered through my share of painful moments. Before now, I thought I knew all pain's ugly faces, all the ways it can cripple and scar. But with one phone call I discovered that there's no worse pain in the world than watching someone you love suffer and being powerless to make the suffering stop. I kissed her and held her and rocked her. I promised I'd do everything I could to help. Words, all of them useless. None of them changed a thing or broke through the new encasing of ice swiftly crystallizing around her. From the moment Bianca took that phone call, she went cold. All the life was sucked out of her. All the fire was extinguished. What was left was a shell-shocked husk. She didn't even cry, which somehow made everything worse. I need to get back as soon as possible, she said hollowly, sitting on the floor with her back against the side of the bed. I crouched beside her, holding her clammy, limp hand, fighting a terrible slipping feeling inside me like a landslide in my chest. Of course, the plane can be ready within the hour. I'll make sure the bags get packed. She closed her eyes. She didn't speak again until we got back to New Orleans, except to say goodbye to my parents, who were as distraught as I was when they heard the news. We left Moonstar Ranch the same way we came, by limo and private jet, but everything had changed. I could tell by the way Bianca stared with flat eyes at the ring on her finger that what had happened between us was before. This was after, the new reality in which her mother was dead, taking Bianca's reason for us to be together to the grave with her. So yes, I thought I knew pain before. I thought I knew loss. But those two ruthless bitches were just getting started with me. 36 Bianca. It was raining when we touched down in New Orleans, the sky the same ugly lead grey as my soul. I didn't know why I felt so numb. Shock, I suppose. In any case, I was grateful for the way all my senses were dulled, because I knew there were 1,000 invisible knives of anguish hovering all around me, hungry for their moment to slash and draw blood. They'd get their moment, of that I was sure. But for now I was safe in a cocoon of soft white noise where nothing could reach me. Not even the torment in Jackson's eyes. His engagement ring was a cold, heavy weight on my finger, a constant reminder of the bargain we'd made and why. I couldn't think about it. I couldn't face any more harsh realities today. All I could do was put one foot in front of the other and keep breathing. When we arrived at Mama's house, I could barely even do that. "I've got you," said Jackson when I stepped out of the car and almost fell. He put his arm around me and helped me up the steps and into the house. Eni was there, her face streaked with dried tears, which got a fresh coat the minute she laid eyes on me. "Boo," she wailed and crushed me into her embrace. "It's okay," I whispered into her shoulder. "We're going to be okay." I didn't know who I was trying to convince, her or myself. A young red-headed woman in pale blue scrubs stood by the sofa, wringing her hands. "Miss Hardwick," she murmured, moving closer. "I'm Jennifer Wright from Home Angels Healthcare. I'm so sorry for your loss." Home Angels. I supposed they were the company Jackson hired. I struggled to focus on her voice as she continued to speak. I was assigned the afternoon shift. Gina, who was here in the morning, said your mother was resting comfortably when she left at noon. She had a little lunch, then went to take a nap. Then she must have. Jennifer didn't know how to politely say it, so she skipped ahead. Apparently Eni arrived just before I did at 4. Eni clung to me, her tears wetting my neck. She looked like she was sleeping, so peaceful like an angel she dissolved into a fresh round of weeping. Jennifer chewed on her lower lip and increased the speed of her hand wringing. Realizing he was the only capable person in the room, Jackson went into efficiency mode. The paramedics were called, he asked Jennifer, sounding like he might snap her in two if she answered incorrectly. Yes, she peeped, going pale. They tried to resuscitate her. When that failed, they asked if we wanted to transfer Mrs. Hardwick to the hospital or make arrangements with a funeral home to pick up her remains here. Her remains. I almost fainted but held myself up through sheer strength of will, gritting my teeth against the sob rising in the back of my throat. Jennifer hurried on. Eni and I thought it would be best if Mrs. Hardwick stayed where she was until her daughter arrived. I hope that was all right. Yes, I said faintly. I pulled out of Eni's embrace and nodded at Jennifer, who looked frightened that she might have done something wrong. Thank you, Jennifer. I looked down the hallway at the closed door of Mama's bedroom. Noticing the direction of my gaze, Jackson gently settled his hand on my shoulder. Do you want me to? No, I said. I want a minute alone with her if you don't mind. Of course not, take all the time you need. I'll call Robertson's funeral home and get the arrangements started, unless there's somewhere else you'd rather. That's fine, I whispered, already moving away. It didn't make a difference what company took Mama's body. The parts of her that mattered were already gone. Steeling my nerves, I hesitated a moment with my hand on the door before going in. The only other dead person I'd ever seen was my father, and he'd died when I was young enough to understand death but not be terrified of it. I didn't know how I'd react to seeing Mama lying lifelessly in her bed, and I said a silent prayer I'd be able to withstand it. The door creaked open. The room was dim, lit only with the lamp on the table beside the bed. The air was cool and still and smelled faintly of Mama's perfume. I crept over to the bed with my heart pounding, terror closing around my throat like a hangman's noose. When I grew nearer and saw the serene expression on Mama's face, the terror faded away like a tide receding and I could breathe again. I knelt beside the bed and took her hand. Not even a hint of warmth still lingered in it. I can't believe you left me, I whispered, hearing the accusation in my voice. All of a sudden I was a child again, 6 years old, lost in the Mardi Gras parade when Mama briefly let go of my hand. I had the same feeling now as I did then, raw disbelief mixed with rising hysteria, searching desperately for her face in a crowd of strangers. Only this time the hysteria wouldn't be replaced with sweet relief when I was found. I'd remain lost forever, alone in a sea of unfamiliar faces, crying out her name. I told her I loved her. I told her she was the best mother who ever lived. I told her I hoped one day to be half the woman she was, and that I'd always try to make her proud. Through it all she was silent and still the way only a corpse can be, that utter absence of life like a negative charge sucking the air from the room. It wasn't until I whispered, "Tell Daddy I miss him," that I sensed a change in the atmosphere. Something shimmered briefly. The air gained a palpable spark. Maybe it was my imagination, but I'd swear on the Bible I felt a gentle touch on my head. Then it was gone, and I was alone in a cool, quiet room with the body of my mother, and all the pain I'd been holding off came rushing over me at once. I threw my head back and howled like an animal, loud enough to scour every ghost within miles from its grave. The bland-faced men from the funeral home spoke in soft, soothing tones and wore black suits with white carnations in the lapels. I picked out a casket from a catalogue, one with a beautiful lavender lining I knew Mama would have liked. Arrangements were made, paperwork was signed, condolences were given, then they loaded Mama into a hearse and took her away. Eni sent her off with a teary cry of "Safe travels, Miss Davenor," and the pain was so breathtaking I almost fell to my knees. Through it all, Jackson was a rock. He kept his hand on my lower back, on my shoulder or my arm, a constant, gentle touch of support. When I found it hard to stand, he held me up. When I found it impossible to speak, he spoke for me. He thanked Jennifer and told her to go home, then he asked Eni if she could go to the restaurant and take care of things there, because we all could see that I was in no shape to handle it. Cancel all the reservations for the rest of the week, I told her in a dull voice. Put a sign on the front door, closed indefinitely. Should I call anyone for you, boo? People will want to know Davina passed. Yes, I said, my head pounding. Call everyone. I'll let you know as soon as I schedule the funeral service with the church. Thank you, Eni. When Jackson said, tell the restaurant employees they'll be paid for the days off, I didn't have the strength to argue. By then all I wanted to do was lie down and sleep for a few years. Weeping, Eni left. Then Jackson and I sat at the kitchen table, staring at each other like two people who have survived a plane crash only to find themselves stranded on a desert island with no food or shelter and a hurricane blowing in. I'm so sorry, he finally said. His eyes were fierce. She was a lovely woman. I looked at the table, its wood surface nicked and scratched from years of use, while grief swept through me like a raging river overflowing its banks. Yes, thank you. For everything you've done, thank you. You've been a great help. I didn't mean for it to sound like a dismissal, like a decision had been made by a committee that he'd performed well under pressure but should now be on his way, but somehow it did. He flinched a little, slouched lower in his chair. A minute passed in silence, then Jackson cleared his throat. You're staying here tonight. I hadn't thought about it, but the moment the words were out of his mouth I knew I wanted to do exactly that. Yes, I said, strangely relieved. He nodded. His jaw was set. My engagement ring caught a ray of light and reflected it around the kitchen in a million prism sparks. I couldn't imagine a more awkward moment had ever occurred. He asked, is there anything I can do, anything you need? When I said no, he visibly deflated. Okay, he answered quietly. Then I guess I'll just go. I couldn't look at him. A chaos of wing beats filled my chest. Did I want him to go? Did I want him to stay? I didn't know anything anymore, only that it was hard to catch my breath. I feared if I looked up into his face, I might shatter into 1,000 tiny pieces. He stood. Call me if you need anything. His voice had an edge of sorrow, like he already knew I wouldn't. He kissed the top of my head, his lips the barest brush of pressure, fleetingly there, then gone. Then he walked slowly to the front door, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. When I heard the door open, my lungs filled with breath, as if I were about to shout, but then the door closed and I was left alone in silence, the awful reality of the day settling into my bones. Somewhere off in the distance, a dog howled. It exactly matched the sound inside my head. That day passed. Heartless how the sun has the nerve to rise and set and rise again, witness to so much ruin. I awoke in the morning with no idea where I was. I bolted upright on the sofa, staring around the small parlor in confusion, in my clothes from the day before, blinking against the glare of sun streaming through the curtains. Then I remembered and felt 1,000 years old. Everything looked different without Mama in the world, even my own face in the mirror. I looked older, harder, something had extinguished in my eyes. I couldn't eat but desperately needed coffee. I made myself a cup and almost dropped it when the phone rang, my nerves were so shredded. Hello, Bianca, said the colonel, sobbing. Oh, Bianca, tell me it isn't true. I closed my eyes and rested my forehead against the wall. I can't believe it either, it's impossible that she's gone. Listening to a man cry is one of the most terrible things in the world. Their tears seem so much more devastating than female tears, maybe because they so infrequently shed them. Was it a heart attack? The colonel asked, his voice choked with shock. I don't know. She didn't want an autopsy, so we won't know the exact cause of death, but the chemo was really hard on her system. There was a stunned silence. Chemo? She had lung cancer, I whispered. She's been on chemo for weeks. She was scheduled for surgery on Wednesday. The colonel's small cry of distress pierced me straight through my heart. Cancer, my God, she never said a word. I thought she had the flu. I know, I'm sorry, that's what she told everyone. It was a minute or two before he composed himself enough to talk. You know what I think, he said in a ragged whisper. No, what? He drew in a long, shuddering breath. I imagined him on the other end of the phone, wiping his eyes and pulling himself up straight into that ramrod posture he was known for. He said, I think she was just tired of Bane without your daddy, and now that you're settled, she decided it was time for her to be on her way. A sob broke from my chest. Fighting tears, I clapped a hand over my mouth. I loved your mama, Bianca. She was a good woman and I'll miss her something fierce. But I always knew she'd given her heart away a long time ago. I knew she'd never stop loving your daddy, but I'm grateful for the time we spent together because she made me happy. She made the world a better place. I didn't know how I was still standing. Strange, strangled noises gurgled up from deep in my throat. The colonel asked gently, Is there anything you need, darling? Anything I can do for you. I managed to tell him no, but it was someone else's voice who answered. Someone with a whiskey-soaked growl and a broken heart. We said goodbye and hung up, but before my coffee got cold the phone rang again. It didn't stop ringing for hours. In between phone calls were the visitors. They came in a constant stream, friends and neighbors and members of Mama's church, bearing casseroles and weeping into crumpled-up tissues. Everything became a blur. All the faces began to blend together. I was simultaneously exhausted and energized by all the people who came, their grief piling on top of my own, their voices like the angry buzz of wasps inside my head. I started to feel disconnected, numb again, and was grateful for it. Numb was better than the alternative. With any luck, numb would get me through the rest of my life. I spoke to the church and set Mama's funeral for Wednesday at noon. So the day she was supposed to have life-saving surgery was the day she'd be buried. I didn't want to examine the coincidence. When Jackson called, I told him I needed to stay at Mama's house for now to deal with everything that had to be done. When he asked if he should come over to help, I said no. After the awkward pause that followed, he said he'd send some of my clothes over. I think he was hoping I'd say don't bother, I'll be coming to live at Rivendell soon, but I was so tired I just said, that's fine. When we hung up it felt like I'd been untethered. I was a little boat who'd lost her moorings and was drifting aimlessly out to sea. For the next 2 days I didn't eat. I barely slept. I survived on coffee and adrenaline, forgetting to shower until Eni told me I smelled like a goat. By Wednesday morning I was a wreck. I didn't know how I'd make it through the funeral without collapsing. But once again Jackson's strength shored me up. Then he gave my little boat a hard push into rough waters and set me free. 37 Bianca, it was a bracing 58 degrees, the sky a clear, brilliant blue above our heads. Eni stood to my left, crying softly into a handkerchief. Jackson was to my right, stony as the inside of my heart. The church service was beautiful, attended by almost 400 people. A gospel choir raised the rafters in song. Hoyt arranged for a jazz funeral procession from St. Augustine's to the cemetery. 24 musicians in black caps and white dress shirts slowly led the mourners on foot through the streets of New Orleans to the sound of hymns played on trumpets, drums, saxophones, and clarinets. At the grave site there were so many flower arrangements the bees came out in force, adding a gentle hum to underscore the priest's final blessing of farewell. Then Mama's casket was lowered into the ground and it was done. Back at the house the wake lasted for an eternity. Finally, well after nightfall, the house emptied and I was left alone with my grief and a grim fiancé who looked exactly as wrecked as I felt. His rough black beard was back. His hair had obviously only been finger-combed. He was restless and edgy, a dark thundercloud of mood over his head. Though he wore a suit and tie, he seemed more of the beast than I'd ever seen him. "Let's sit down," he said gruffly, gesturing to the sofa. "We need to talk." Surprised, I sat and folded my hands in my lap while I waited for him to sit too. That moment never came. He stood looking at the floor, his hands hanging loose at his sides and slightly trembling. "Jackson," he glanced up at me. His eyes were so dark, something about the look in them made my skin crawl. Spooked, I said, "What is it?" He moistened his lips. From the inside pocket of his coat, he slowly withdrew a set of folded papers. "We don't have to draw this out any longer than necessary. I wanted to wait until after." He swallowed, moistened his lips again, then started anew. "I knew you had so much on your plate. I wanted to wait until after the funeral to give you this." He held out the papers. "It's my copy of our contract." Taking the papers, I furrowed my brow in confusion. "I don't understand." Jackson dragged a hand through his hair. He loosened his tie, then went to stand at the front window and gazed out at the night like he was no longer holding out hope of finding something he'd lost. His voice low and rough, he asked, "You didn't think I'd force you to go through with it now, did you?" When I was silent, stunned because I thought I understood what he meant, he turned to me with a look so anguished it made my heart skip a beat. "Please tell me you don't think I'm the kind of man who would do that." I slowly rose, the papers shook like mad in my hands. "We made an agreement," I said hoarsely, not recognizing my own voice. "Your inheritance, it hasn't been about my inheritance for me for a while now, Bianca," he interrupted harshly, his eyes glittering. "Honestly, I'm not sure it ever was." It hung there between us, breathtakingly raw. I whispered, "Jax." Something in my expression caused him visible pain. He turned away, stuffed his hands into his pockets, and bowed his head. "I'll have all your things brought back here. I'm sorry you had to let go of your house. The timing was just, his laugh was hollow shit. I wanted to say something, anything, but words wouldn't come. Jackson was letting me out of our deal. I didn't have to marry him, he was going to lose everything. Finally, I came to my senses. A deal was a deal after all, and I wasn't about to renege on my end of the bargain, no matter what circumstances had changed. I can't let you do that, I said, and dropped the papers on the coffee table. They landed with a dull slap that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Jackson turned from the window. He looked at the papers, then at my face. Then he crossed the room in a few long strides and picked up the contract. He ripped it in half with one abrupt, savage motion. Don't you get it? You're not obligated to me anymore. You're free. Go live your life. His voice was choked with emotion. His eyes were wild like I'd never seen them. I put my hand over my thundering heart. I'm sorry, he rasped, instantly contrite, taking a step back. Fuck, I'm so sorry, I'm an asshole, I know this is the worst day of your life. I didn't mean to, I can't, he cursed again, whirling away and headed for the front door. Keep the ring, he said over his shoulder. Hock it, throw it away. Whatever you want, I'll send all your things tomorrow. Let me know if there's anything else you need. He opened the door and was gone before I could even decide if the words forming on my lips were thank you or don't go. The screen door slammed shut behind him. True to his word, Jackson had all my things delivered to Mama's house the next day in the same boxes. I'd packed them into a lifetime ago. I spent a few days in a weird kind of limbo, puttering around aimlessly, trying to decide if I wanted to sell the house or keep it, before I gave up pressuring myself to make any big decisions and retired to the sofa in the front parlor, where I stayed for several more days, rising only to scrounge from the casseroles and leftovers crammed in the fridge. I didn't allow myself to think about Jackson. There was a dangerous ache under my breastbone when I got too close to even picturing his face, so I shoved the memory of him and our short, magical time at Moonstar Ranch down into a dark corner of my heart and concentrated on the business of being depressed. Eni didn't let that continue long before barging through the front door and scolding me to within an inch of my life. Get off your behind, girl, and get back to work. Who do you think you're honorin' with all this moppin' around? Because it sure ain't your mama. She'd be scandalized if she could see you right now lyin' there wallowin' like a pig in shit. Eni loomed over me, hands propped on her hips, scowling down at the pathetic picture I made in my dirty pajamas and unwashed hair on the couch. I severely regretted giving her a key. You're right, I said tonelessly, staring at the ceiling. I know you're right. Then get your ass in gear and get up. She gave the sofa a frustrated little kick, jostling me. I'm in mourning. You shouldn't curse at people in mourning. She snorted and crossed her arms over her chest. You're in danger of getting on my bad side, boo. She didn't have to say more than that. The last person who got on her bad side ended up with 4 slashed tires on his car, a headless rooster on his doorstep, and a strange, persistent rash. I'm up, I grumbled, rousing. Terrorist. You're the terrorist, child. Have you looked in a mirror lately? You're so frightening, I'd hire you to haunt a house. You're so scary looking you'd make a freight train take a dirt road. You look so bad, I get it, I said, stumbling to my feet. I look like crap. Eni nodded as if I'd said something remarkably intelligent for once. Like you fell out the ugly tree and hit every damn branch on the way down. I sighed heavily. Eni grimaced and waved an offended hand in front of her face. Lord, that breath of yours is nuclear, girl. Can't believe it hasn't melted the lips right off your face. From somewhere deep inside me emerged a grudging chuckle which made Eni smile and nod her head. That's better. Now go take a shower and put on some clean clothes. We're goin' to the restaurant. You got people to feed and I miss that ornery old billy goat Hoyt more than I ever would a guessed. Don't gimme that stink eye, she snapped when I raised my brows. And if you repeat that to anyone I'll mash your potatoes. My lips are sealed. I smiled for the first time in days as I headed off to the bathroom to wash away a week's worth of neglect. I stopped when I heard my cell phone ring from the kitchen counter. I didn't recognize the number when I picked up. Hello, Miss Hardwick, it's Michael Roth. He was the attorney I'd hired to review my contract with Jackson. How can I help you, Mr. Roth? I received a copy of the trust documents from Mr. Boudreau's attorney. Oh, yes, well, Mr. Boudreau and I. The contract you reviewed, I sighed. Mr. Boudreau doesn't want to move forward with the marriage, so the contract is void at this point. The attorney's pause was so loaded I imagined the phone gained weight in my hand. He said, but the trust isn't. I yawned, scratching my head. Miss Hardwick, did you seek legal counsel before signing the trust documents? Oh dear, There was an accusation in his tone. I wasn't in the state of mind to deal with a peeved attorney. Well, no, I admitted sheepishly. The whole thing was a little rushed. The trust isn't linked in any way to the marriage contract, he interrupted impatiently. I rubbed my eyes with my fist, starting to get irritated with the conversation. Mr. Roth, you'll have to speak English. I haven't had my coffee yet. What are you saying? Amusement warmed his voice. I'm saying Mr. Boudreau gifted you $1 million. I frowned. This didn't make any sense. Maybe I was understanding him wrong. No, that can't be right. The trust is part of the marriage contract. The two go together. Without a marriage, there's no money. Mr. Roth started to speak slowly and patiently, as you would to a child or someone mentally impaired. There is no mention of establishing a trust in the marriage contract, Miss Hardwick. As far as the contract is concerned, the trust doesn't exist. There was only a stipulation that a payment in the amount of $1 million would be conferred to you upon your marriage, but it never specifically spelled out how that payment would be made. This trust I've just reviewed, I heard the sound of rustling paper in the background, is ironclad. It's irrevocable. You are the sole trustee. No one else has access to the money. That $1 million is yours, married or not. I rolled my eyes. Mr. Roth, respectfully, you're talking out of your behind. I know you graduated from college because I saw the framed degree on the wall behind your desk, but you've got this all wrong. Jackson Boudreau would never make such a stupid mistake. After a while, Mr. Roth said, I agree, he wouldn't, it was intentional. My mouth opened, nothing came out. Of course, if you don't believe me, I advise you to get another opinion. He sniffed, his ego dinged by my disbelief. But any attorney will tell you the same thing. Congratulations, Miss Hardwick, you're a millionaire. Breathed, Mr. Roth kept talking, his voice a distant drone in my ear, but I heard nothing else he said. I stood in the kitchen blank with shock until the house phone rang and jolted me back into reality. I disconnected the call with Mr. Holt, who was still talking, and picked up the phone on the wall. Hardwick Residence, I said, completely disoriented. Mr. Holt had to be wrong, he had to be. Why on earth would Jackson do a thing like that? Bianca, said Trace. His mouth turned my name into a sneer. I stiffened, going from disoriented to teed off in 2 seconds flat. You've got some nerve calling this house, I said, hackles rising. He chuckled. It was an ugly sound, full of malice. What, I can't call to pay my respects? We both knew he wasn't calling to pay his respects. He had other business on his mind which I had no intention of listening to. I'm only going to tell you this one more time, Trace, stay away from me. Or what? He snarled. You'll have Jackson Boudreau buy up the whole block instead of just the one building. What the heck are you talking about? I hated myself for taking the bait but needed to know what he meant. Suddenly anything to do with Jackson was of paramount importance, even if it came from Trace's fanged mouth. You know exactly what I'm talking about. When I didn't answer, he shouted, my restaurant. The building it was going to open in suddenly getting bought up even though it wasn't on the market. The new owner cancelling my lease. The hairs on my arms rose in gooseflesh. My heart started to thump. Not daring to believe it, I said slowly, Jackson bought the building where you were going to open your restaurant and then cancelled your lease. Trace's laugh was hard and a little scary. You're a shitty actress, Bumblebee, he said bitterly. Don't think for a minute I don't know who asked him to do it. For a moment I went totally blank. My mind was as snowy as a polar bear's backside. And a hysterical laugh broke from my chest. Jackson bought the building where Trace was going to open his restaurant and cancelled the lease. Filled with glee, I cackled madly again, stamping my foot on the floor. Enid came in from the parlor and looked at me like she was wondering if I needed to take a nice, long vacation in a place with barred windows and padded walls. She wasn't the only one affected by it. Trace flipped his lid. He roared, you're fucking stupid. I hooted, positively giddy. And your proof? Apoplectic, he sputtered, you need me, you told me you'd always love me. I will always love you, those were your exact goddamn words. Then it was like something inside me was just done with him, dusted off its hands and turned tail without another look back. I said calmly, I'm not Whitney Houston, you silly goose. I need you like the word knife needs the letter K. The only thing you ever gave me was trouble and a headache. I hung up. Enid and I looked at each other. Who on earth was that? She asked, wide-eyed. Snake oil salesman. I told him to find the nearest tall building and go stand out on a ledge. She narrowed her eyes at me, leaning in to look closer. You okay, boo? I stared at her as several things became clear all at once, like a light switch had been flipped on inside my brain and 1,000 bulbs glowed white hot, illuminating what had been standing there in the dark all along, waiting for me to open my eyes. I was a damn fool. A stubborn, blind, hopeless fool. The worst part was, it was myself I was fooling. With wonder in my voice, I said, "Eni, Jackson Boudreau asked my mama for permission to marry me when he didn't have to. He gave me a 7-carat Tiffany diamond ring when I said I wanted a simple gold band. He gave me $1 million in cash for nothing, and bought an entire building so a man who'd hurt me couldn't hurt me again. And told me his deepest, darkest secrets, things he'd never told anyone before." Eni blinked at me unimpressed. "What's your point?" I inhaled a slow breath. My nerves tingled almost painfully, like they'd been frozen for years but were finally coming alive. I whispered, "I think Jackson Boudreau is in love with me." Eni made a face like I was the world's biggest moron. "Of course he's in love with you, dummy. A blind man could see that. Stars above, don't tell me you didn't know." When I just gaped at her silently, she threw her hands in the air. "How I'm supposed to deal with this kind of ignorance, I surely don't know. Heavens to Betsy, Bianca, sometimes you can be awful dense." My throat raw with emotion, I said, "I thought love was supposed to be weak knees and butterflies in your stomach and a terrible longing that could never be quenched." Eni shook her head, chuckled, came over and embraced me. "No, child," she said gently, patting my back. "That's romance. Romance is built on doubt. Love is solid, constant. If you're not careful, you might mistake it for boring because it's so reliable. Love is warm and deep and comfortable, just right, so you float in it peacefully without ever being scalded or frozen, like a perfect, relaxing bubble bath. But it's also fierce and strong and demands all the best parts of you, the parts that are giving and honest and true. Love makes you a better person. It makes you want to be a better person. You know it's love when you feel comfortable just as you are, when you feel seen and understood, when you know you could tell all your darkest truths and they'd be accepted without judgment." Eni pulled away and gently smoothed a hand over my hair. "Love isn't butterflies, boo. It isn't weak knees, it's a pride of lions. It's a pack of wolves. It's I've got your back even if it costs me my own life. Because unlike romance that fizzles at the first sign of trouble, love will fight to the death. When it's love, you'll go to war to avenge even the slightest offense, and you'll be justified. Because of all the marvelous and terrible things we can experience in this life, love is the only one that will last beyond it." A car with a bad muffler rumbled by on the street outside. I heard the distant hum of a jet plane flying somewhere far overhead, and deep, deep down inside my soul, a calm voice said yes. "Oh God," I blurted, my eyes going wide. "I love him, Eni. I love Jackson Boudreau." Eni sighed deeply, tilted back her head and beseeched the ceiling. "Honestly, Jesus, how can you burden me with such stupidity? I have to call him, I've got to call him right now. Oh Lord, what is the matter with me? I'm an A+ idiot," I babbled, scrabbling wildly at the phone on the wall like it might launch itself into outer space to escape my insane clutches. I punched in the number with frantic stabbing motions. I waited breathlessly for the line to connect, but his cell phone went straight to voicemail. Panicked, I called the house. Rayford picked up with a smooth, "Good evening, Boudreau residence." I began to holler incoherently. "Rayford, it's Bianca. I need to speak with Jackson. Please put him on the phone." Rayford paused before answering. "Mr. Boudreau is occupied at the moment," he said in a strange, ominous tone. "May I take a message?" My heart pounded so hard I was out of breath. "Occupied." "No, Rayford, you don't understand. It's very important that I speak with him. I'm sorry, but that's not possible," he said briskly. "Is there anything I can help you with?" Rayford had never been remote like this with me before. He was acting like we'd never even met. This smelled to high heaven. Something was seriously wrong. "Rayford," I said, controlling the hysteria in my voice as best I could, "what's going on?" Another pause, like he was considering whether or not to answer, then he made a little embarrassed cough. "Mr. Boudreau has a guest. I'll be happy to tell him you called, however. Have a nice evening." The phone went dead in my hand. I stared at it in amazement. Then, with a shock like I'd stuck my finger into a power outlet, I knew. Eni said, "Well," cold with horror, I said, "What day is it, Eni?" She frowned at me. "It's Tuesday." "No, the date," I shouted, flailing my hands. "What's the date?" 16th. Why, the 16th. Dear Lord, today is Jackson's birthday. He had to get married by his birthday or lose his inheritance. He couldn't come to the phone because he was occupied with a guest. I dropped the phone and left it dangling from its cord as I tore down the hall to the bedroom to get a pair of shoes, screaming at Eni over my shoulder to call me a taxi and put it on super emergency rush. I had to go stop a wedding. 38 Jackson Rayford quietly hung up the library phone. I didn't look up from the paperwork I'd been perusing when I asked, "Who was that?" "Telemarketer," he said, "annual fundraising for the local police." Now I did look up, surprised. I wonder why the chief didn't call me himself. He knows I don't like to talk to telemarketers. I thought for a moment. Didn't they just have the police fundraiser a few months ago? Rayford's expression was bland. "You write so many checks for fundraisers, sir, I can never remember which one's which." From the corner of my desk he picked up my crystal decanter, tilted it over my empty glass and smiled. "Refill," I sighed heavily. I knew I'd been drinking too much lately, but it was the only thing getting me through the nights. "Yes, thanks." He poured me a generous measure, then turned to the young woman in a navy pantsuit and sensible shoes seated across the desk from me. "Miss Taylor, would you care for a drop?" Her mouth pinched. Which was a feat because her mouth was already so small it looked like a tiny puckered hole. Her choice of brown lipstick was an unfortunate one that only added to the effect. Every time I looked at her, I had to bite the inside of my cheek so I didn't laugh. "No," she said like she was offended by the question. "I don't drink." Rayford and I shared a glance. My heavy sigh came again. "Call me if you need anything else, sir," said Rayford. He nodded at Taylor, then excused himself, leaving the library doors open behind him. Miss Taylor didn't waste a moment getting back to the subject at hand. "Section 4D could be problematic. I think it's too vague." My head pounded. We'd been reviewing the paperwork for almost 2 hours, and every time I thought we were close to finishing, she found something else she deemed problematic. The crick in my neck was problematic. The cramp in my lower back was problematic. The raw ache in the place in my chest where my heart was supposed to be beating was also problematic, but I wasn't thinking about that. It makes no sense to dwell on things that are out of your control. I took another big swig of bourbon instead. 4D, I repeated, flipping through the document. "Right." I stared at the page. Legal terms swam up into my vision. I poured more booze down my throat. How is she? What's she doing right now? Is she thinking about me? Damn, who was I kidding? No amount of bourbon or denial could stop me from thinking about Bianca. I knew I'd be thinking of her for the rest of my life, which was part of the reason I was so depressed. "Excuse me," I snapped my head up. Taylor was staring at me like I'd farted in church. "What?" I asked apprehensively. "You made an odd sound, like you were trying to say something." "Oh no, Taylor, that's only the sound of rampant despair. Please ignore me, I'm just over here dying." Thinking out loud, I said with a straight face. "Sorry." She looked like she had an itch somewhere indelicate that she really needed to scratch. She folded her hands over the contract in her lap and glared at me. "Mr. Boudreau," she said, her pinched lips barely moving, "would you like to take a break?" I almost groaned in relief. "Yes, I need to stretch my legs, back in 10. I was already on my feet and headed toward the door. "I'll be right here," she said, adding to my misery. I had to get out of the house before I started throwing things. Ignoring Rayford's startled glance when I passed him in the kitchen, I burst through the French doors and out into the cool evening air. Then I stood on the lawn in the backyard with my hands on my knees, gulping in deep breaths, wondering how long it would take before the memory of Bianca's presence would fade from my mind. It had been 6 days since the funeral, and I was dying by degrees without her. But the nights were the worst. The dreams, dear God, torture. Every little moment I spent in her presence had somehow seared itself into my subconscious, so when I fell asleep I was treated to a technicolor replay of everything she'd ever said to me, every look, every smile, every moment near her. They were nightmares of a sort, especially the dreams about our time together at Moonstar Ranch. Even in my dreams I could feel her nearness. "Damn it all," I muttered. I straightened and ran a hand over my face. My beard, which grew like weeds, was almost as thick as it had been the night I met her. It was a scratchy mess, not unlike my brain. I spent a few minutes just breathing, letting the fresh air clear my head. Then I wandered down to the lower lawn where the tent had been set up for the Wounded Warrior benefit, leaned against the rough bark of an ancient willow, and stared out at the lake. It glittered like 1,000 stars under the light of the rising moon. Being with Bianca had changed me in ways I didn't know I could change. They say it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, but that was a big, steaming pile of bullshit. It was infinitely worse for me now. I thought I'd loved cricket, but that was nothing compared to the fire Bianca stoked in my heart. I loved her so much it burned. It scorched and glowed white-hot in all the dark places inside me like I'd swallowed the sun. But this was reality now. Loneliness and longing and arms that ached to hold someone who was no longer there, who would never be there, who would never love me. My eyes stung. I realized when I swiped my fingers over my cheeks that they were wet. I laughed a hoarse, ugly sound and turned away from the lake. I couldn't stand to look at it suddenly. It made me sick. The moonlight reflected off its surface was too romantic, and I was in no mood for romance. Let's get this over with. Glaring at the house, I took a moment to steel myself, then I trudged back inside, not ready to finish what I'd started with Taylor, but knowing it had to be done. Rayford wasn't in the kitchen. From down the long hallway I heard raised voices. Someone was shouting in the library, a woman. I knew it was only my lovesick heart that made the voice sound like Bianca's, but I took off at a run anyway. My steps echoed like gunfire off the marble floor. When I reached the open library doors, I skidded to a stop, blinking in astonishment. Rayford lounged on the sofa, an amused smile lighting his face. Standing on opposite sides of the coffee table were Taylor and Bianca, squared off like pistoleros about to draw their guns. Bianca was dressed in rumpled pink pajamas with little blue bunny rabbits all over them, a beige raincoat, and a pair of those hideous clogs she wore to work. Her hair was sticking up in wild tufts all over her head. She looked like an escapee from an insane asylum, and also the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And another thing, she shouted at Taylor, you really shouldn't wear brown lipstick. Well, hello there, sir, said Rayford calmly. As you can see, Miss Bianca and Miss Taylor were just getting acquainted. His smile grew wider. I tried to tell Miss Bianca you were busy, but she almost broke down the front door, so here we are. Bianca, I said, my voice raw. What are you doing here? She turned to me with burning eyes and a heaving chest, the color high in her cheeks. She shouted, I'm here to stop the man I love from marrying the wrong woman. Taylor's mouth dropped open. Rayford giggled and my heart stopped dead in my chest. I wheezed, love, before Bianca cut me off. Yes, that's right, I love you, Jackson Boudreaux. It sounded like an accusation or a confession of something terrible and terminal, like you'd say, the tumor is inoperable and I only have a week to live. But she kept talking, and my heart rebooted and took flight like a phoenix rising from the ashes. I'm sorry I didn't realize it sooner, but I think I'm just about as stubborn as you are. You're the best man I've ever known, and I'll be damned if I'm gonna let you hitch your wagon to some cash-hungry bottom feeder just to save your inheritance. She gestured to Taylor, who cried an offended, oh. I exhaled, and it was like fire. Bianca stepped toward me. She squared her shoulders and looked up into my face. She said, my whole life I've been waiting for someone like you. Only I didn't know that someone would come with a caveman beard and a bossy streak and a scowl that could peel paint from the walls. And then you came at me with your ridiculous proposal, and then Mama died, and then I lost my mind, so it took me a minute to figure it out. She swallowed. When she spoke next, her voice was quieter. But I love you, Jackson, and I hope you know that I don't give a damn about your money, because I don't. In fact, I think it would do you a world of good to flush that inheritance right down the toilet and live like a normal person for once. She added dryly, I've recently been informed by my attorney that I'm a millionaire anyway, so it's not like we'd be broke. Taylor huffed. Mr. Boudreaux, will you please tell this woman? Shut up, Taylor, I said. She threw her hands in the air and rolled her eyes. Bianca took another step closer to me, then another, until she was so close I could see the flecks of gold in her beautiful brown eyes. She flattened her hands over my chest. I thought my heart would explode, it pounded so hard. Bianca said softly, we went about this whole thing backward. Marriage proposals are supposed to come after you've fallen in love, not before, but I have a feeling nothing we're ever going to do will be in the proper order. So what I'm proposing is that you tell this skinny little mercenary with the weird brown lips to go pound sand, and you and me get married. Her lips curved into a shy smile, because I would like to date you. I took her sweet face in my hands. She slid her arms around my waist and hugged me, and I wondered if it was possible for a person to die of happiness. I felt like I might float right off the floor. I whispered, that skinny little mercenary is my attorney, sweetheart. Bianca blinked. Her brows pulled together into an adorable frown. What? A rumble of laughter burbled up from somewhere deep inside me, shaking my whole body, loosening decades of anguish and pain. Taylor is my attorney, has been for years, we're not getting married. We're working on the contract for the new division Boudreaux Bourbon's going to open in New Orleans, the one I'm going to run. Bianca's eyes went wide. She squeaked, contract, division. I nodded. My father and I had a long talk after you and I left Kentucky. We agreed that opening a new distillery in Louisiana would be good for business. There's no wedding going on here. Bianca's gaze turned to the paperwork on my desk, then to Taylor. She paled, then she whispered, "Oh, shoot." From the sofa, Rayford cackled and clapped his hands. Bianca whirled around and glared at him. "Rayford, you did that on purpose," he shrugged. "Sometimes you gotta give the blind a helping hand." Bianca turned to Taylor. She put her hand over her chest and said, "I am so sorry, oh my goodness. I take back what I said, you're not a mercenary, I'm sure you're a wonderful woman, you look very smart, and you're not skinny, that was just me being jealous, you have a lovely figure." Taylor crossed her arms over her chest. "And the brown lipstick," Bianca grimaced. "Well, enough apologies, come here." I grabbed Bianca by the arm and kissed her. She took big handfuls of my shirt and kissed me back like she was starving. At some point Rayford and Taylor must have left the room, but I didn't hear them go. I was too busy drowning in Bianca. "What about your inheritance?" she asked breathlessly, breaking away. "It was get married or work for the company, remember, not that I care about the money anymore. It was just time for me to let go of the past and grow up." I stroked her satin cheek. "You're responsible for that, you know. I never would have reconnected with my parents if it weren't for you." Bianca rested her forehead on my chest. "So you don't need to get married after all." A little tremor went through her. It made me smile. "Technically no," I whispered. "But I want to." She lifted her head and stared at me. Her eyes glimmered with moisture. "And I noticed you're still wearing your engagement ring, so I think you still want to too." A tear crested her lower lid and slid down her cheek. In a broken voice she said, "I just want you. Rich, poor, smiling, growling, bearded or clean-shaven, I just want you, Jax. There's nothing in the world I want more than you." My happy sigh slipped past my lips, barely audible. "Be careful what you wish for, sweetheart," I murmured, my heart singing. "If you think I'm a beast, you haven't seen this beard when it really gets going." Bianca's eyes were dreamy. She went up on her toes, wound her arms tightly around my neck and whispered into my ear, "I can hardly wait."